Hi, it's Nutrition with Burr back again, and I'm going to do a talk today on obesity, and I've called it Threm and Thrive. So this has been very topical. It's been in the news for this last week, with more than 1 billion people worldwide obese, research has shown. Um, Obesity is defined in adults as having a BMI greater or equal to 30. The UK ranked at the 87th highest in the world for the obesity rates for women and the 55th highest for men. So clearly, it's a global issue, obesity, and it's driven by ultra processed foods and processed foods. I think you're going to be tired of my videos, as I'm always going to be talking about processed foods and ultra processed foods and the move from whole foods. Obesity wasn't something that we suffered from 100 years ago. People ate whole foods, very natural foods, foods that maybe were less palatable. So there wasn't that same drive to eat more. I will be talking about obesity in children as well as adults in this slide presentation. So next one is looking at the obesity in children. So obesity has skyrocketed by 45% in 4 to 5-year-olds, and almost 1 in 4, aged 10 to 11 in England are obese. So when kids are leaving school, we have almost 1 in 4 obese. And this has been secondary to the negative effects from lockdown, more time spent on social media, less time outdoors exercising, less time interacting with their friends. Maybe there was more of that people having more takeout type foods, just as treats for the kids and family. So there's many reasons, and we'll look at the reasons in later on. But this is it's shocking. It's something that we haven't seen in before lockdown. We had obesity, but not at this rate. So it's something as parents we need to be responsible for, and we need to promote healthy eating habits and promote activity and move away from computers and iPhones and iPads. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So next slide. So a calorie in is there's a big debate about calories, whether calories matter. At the end of the day, calories do matter. I mean, as a nutritional therapist and as a personal trainer and as a nurse, I've never focused on counting calories when I actually encourage people to eat whole foods. But obviously, if you're going to eat 3,000 to 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day, then calories do matter. And I really think what really matters, more importantly, is what we're putting in. So if we look at all these processed foods up here, these are energy surplus foods. So a burger with 2 slices of cheese, so this McDonald's burger with a beef patty, and the bun comes to roughly 400 calories. The sausage hot dog comes to 300. One single slice of pizza is 285. You have 3 pieces of chicken from one of those Kentucky Fried Chicken places, which would come to almost 1,000 calories. And then French fries, at 100 grams of French fries, would be 323 calories. And if you compare that to, say, sweet potato fries, which are only 150 calories if you make them at home with some olive oil, or if you replaced some of these French fries with cauliflower rice, which is like a low carb food, you'd only be eating 25 calories, but you'd also be more satiated because there's not going to be all the fat and the salt that's added into these foods. that actually makes them hyperpalatable and feeds that reward system in the brain, where that dopamine is released and you want more of it. So that's the problem with all these hyperpalatable foods. You have chicken down here, 2 chicken thighs. There's 278 calories, but it's just done in the oven with some spices, maybe. Again, that's not going to cause any of the inflammation or any of the obesity issues or cravings, and that these chicken nuggets would cause. So with all these foods on the top, we need to remember they're low in fiber, they're low in nutrients, so they're void of nutrients, and they're high in fats, high in salt, and sometimes with sugar added, and very high in carbohydrates. So they give us that quick fix that, oh, yum, pleasure. But then after that, we want to eat more of them. So that creates that whole cycle of binging. So if you go for whole foods, which we have on the bottom, like sardines, if you drain them, you get them in water, it's only 120 calories. And then, we can drink our calories as well, which is a big problem, I think, for teenagers, because there's a lot of this trend of taking pictures of a trendy drink like this caramel latte, I think it is. And there's 620 calories in this latte, which is, got syrup and cream and chocolate and drizzling and all sorts in it. And if you compare that to a cup Americano black, is only 18 calories. And so, somebody who's now at 620 calories just from a drink, and that hasn't even, constitute actually solid food. This is what leads us to this crisis that we're in of obesity. I have put up here the Cheerios. They're around 378 calories, and they, have sugar and fat in them, and they're highly processed. Devoid of minerals and vitamins, but they obviously, all cereals in the UK have vitamins added to them. And then you compare that to the bowl of oatmeal down here, 100 grams. So this is 100 grams of both of these. They're similar in calories, but if you had the bowl of oatmeal, which is high in soluble and insoluble fiber, it's not got any of the added sugar. It's similar in calorie content, but this one is not going to be the driver of obesity when you compare to this one, unless you're very carb sensitive, and some of us are, so or grain sensitive, and you might not be able to tolerate it. But my point here is that, calorie for calorie, depending on the food, if it's highly processed, that's the one that's going to trigger the cravings, that's going to trigger the obesity, that's going to trigger the fat gains, the inflammation. And I have reminded myself down here to just talk about fat and sugar combination. So that is the icing on the cake, really, basically. So your fat and your sugar, that's what's driving this hyperpalatability, the desire to want more of it, to feed that reward system, to crave more of it. So like ice cream, you put it in your mouth, it's got the perfect ratio of fat and sugar, and you eat it and it just melts in your mouth, and it's got that very kind of velvety feel in your mouth. Now probably making us all hungry, just me talking about that. But because when we think about foods, that also triggers hunger, which I will see in a later slide. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, recommends no more than 25 grams of added sugar per day, which is the equivalent of 6 teaspoons. And I mean, I would be saying to stay lower than that. But for somebody who's, trying to lose weight, who is obese, we need to start at where they're at. And if you can get them to, reduce their sugar intake of added sugar to 25 grams, then that will cut out a lot of these kind of foods, because in that caramel latte there will be over 36 grams of sugar. So it's important, to just kind of make swaps. So you could make a swap with the Diet Pepsi with just sparkling water, and add some cucumber or raspberries or strawberries into it, or lemon or lime, to give flavor. So it's also about breaking habits and to gradually do these things. But so calories do matter, but the source of the calories is really what's key here. So we need to move towards whole foods and stop buying into these fast, quick fixes, because it only gives us a short-term fix. Long-term, it creates more hunger, it creates more inflammation, and ultimately leads to obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and many metabolic diseases. So next slide. So this shows you what happens when we have excess energy. So when we eat too many of those type of foods, even if we overeat anything, so overnutrition of any type of food. So, when you're eating in excess, when you can't use those calories because you're sat at the desk all day, you're not moving, you're sedentary. And then this is what happens. You develop this centralized obesity, where the fat cells get very large and you get lots of them. And it promotes visceral fat, which I've said down here, and leads to pro-inflammatory signaling cascade that participates in the development of insulin resistance, arteriosclerosis, and coronary vascular disease. So the visceral fat is the one that we really worry about. So over here, in this particular obese person, they're sedentary, and it triggers all of these inflammatory markers, which are listed down here. But if you look at the person who is, fit and healthy, they have a lot less fat cells in the abdominal area, and they're physically active, so they're muscular and they're cardiovascularly, they're fit. So they maintain their weight because they have muscle mass. Muscle mass is key for maintaining weight, because it helps us burn more calories even at rest. They have more balance in their whole metabolism, and they haven't got the levels of inflammation, which all, high levels of inflammation will increase water retention, will affect how we move, will affect our energy, our brain. We also can get inflammation in the brain from these foods, causing inflammation in the hypothalamus. And that also plays into this whole overeating and obesity, insulin resistance. So I think I've kind of said quite a bit about that, the excess energy. And then I've just mentioned some of these signaling molecules which are here. In the fat cells, you have MCP1, which is a signaling molecule which attracts immune cells to the fat tissue. And then that increases the macrophage recruitment into the adipose tissue, which then establishes an inflammatory process leading to cytokines and chemokine production. Inflammation levels of higher levels of TNF alpha and IL-6 from the fat cells trigger a production of serum reactive protein. We test for that all the time in the hospital when patients were looking for inflammation, CRP. You probably have had that blood test done. But CRP is produced in the liver, and overproduction of that can lead to insulin resistance and inflammation. And then we have the one down here looking at PA1, which is involved in blood clotting, and it causes activation of plasmogenic factor, which causes over-clotting, so too much clotting of the blood, and that can lead to strokes, heart disease, arteriosclerosis. And then the other one, which I've mentioned here, is the CAM1, which happens as a result of oxidized LDL. And now we talked about how LDL can, I think we've talked about that in another one, how LDL can become oxidized. Well, it can become oxidized from inflammatory foods, which are the processed foods, the seed oils, which are denatured and they're ultra processed and they're oxidized before we eat them in the bottle. And then you have all those high sugar foods. All that leads to the reactive oxygen species, which I've explained in my previous video on attention deficit disorders, which worsens this whole cycle of inflammation, causing damage to the endothelial cell lining. So with that CAM1, it causes accumulation of immune cells in the vessel walls, which then promotes an inflammatory process. So because the immune cells all accumulate in the cell walls, they cause adhesions of them, and then this promotes inflammation. So endothelial dysfunction. So we're always blaming saturated fat for the cause of strokes, heart disease, and we forget to think about what inflammatory process is actually going on outside of the saturated fat. So we need to think more that seed oils, highly processed foods are all responsible for heart disease, arteriosclerosis, smoking, alcohol, all those things promote excess inflammation. So the summary is excess fat triggers inflammation, leading to insulin resistance and blood vessel damage, cardiovascular disease, and forming a harmful cycle. So it's the excess visceral fat that we accumulate that is actually one of the key markers for cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and many other metabolic conditions. Sorry, I probably went on a big roundabout way to explain that to you. Okay, so next one is, so we talk about two types of obese people. So we have a metabolically healthy obese person and a metabolically unhealthy obese person. And this is, I think, is a really good picture here, or schema, which shows that in the healthy obese person, they have more fat on their hips. So they're more like a pear, and more on their legs, not very much in the muscle, not very much in the liver, and a small, a lower amount in the abdomen. So the central obesity is less. So this might be the person who goes to the gym, goes for a run. We see lots of runners who are overweight, doing marathons, do really well. And but they're still obese. And they go to the gym and they lift pretty heavy weights. So that's what we call the metabolic healthy obese. And maybe they haven't just, taken on all the lifestyle choices they might not have modified their diet, or they might have high levels of stress, which, is maybe caused by something that at the time they can't remove. It could be a relationship or whatever. But those people are at lower risk of type 2 diabetes, of heart disease, of fatty alcohol liver disease. They actually, we call them the healthy obese. So they're not necessarily going to go on and actually develop any one of these metabolic diseases. But then we have the metabolic unhealthy obese person. So here you can see there's a large amount of fat cells, visceral fat in the abdomen. The adipose size is much bigger. So the size of the fat cells is much bigger than that of the healthy obese. They have less fat cells here on the hip area, and they have less fat cells on the, oops, I have to go back, I clicked, go back, previous, sorry. And they have less on their thighs, but they have more in the muscles. So when you have high levels of fat in the muscle itself, it actually affects how the muscle moves. So that can cause dysfunction of the muscle. high levels of fat here in the abdomen and high levels in the liver. High levels of fat in the liver will cause non-alcohol fatty liver disease, and it also puts you at a very high risk of type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance and heart disease. So it's important to know where the fat is deposited, and we need to be focusing as personal trainers and as nutritionists looking at central obesity to identify metabolic disease and promote exercise and healthy lifestyle habits to overcome this central obesity. So my next slide is, okay, so the British Heart Foundation's recommendation for the circumference measurement for a man, it should be less than 37 inches. So if you're at home and you're watching this video, which I hope you are, get out your measuring tape and stand up and take the tape around and, you know, pull it tight around the belly button. Don't over pull it, because that could be cheating, but put, you know, fit it neatly around. And actually on their website, the British Heart Foundation, they show you how to do it. And if it's greater than 37, then you need to actually start, you know, looking at lifestyle changes to reduce that weight, because as we get older, it's going to get harder to shed those pounds and shed that tummy, that abdominal fat. So, and then for women, it should be less than 31.5 inches. So these are really important, probably better marker than BMI. And because if somebody has fat on their legs and on their arms, but not on their tummy, then obviously they're going to be, hopefully, in theory, metabolically better off than the person who is of the same weight, but it carries it all on their tummy. And carrying it all in your tummy also puts you at a high risk for heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and many other conditions. But also it affects our posture, our back, and the spine, and how we move, basically, and how we sleep. It affects the diaphragm, how that drops down for expansion of the lungs, so for our lung function. So it's all, you know, it's really important that we actually, as nutritionists and as doctors and as personal trainers, that we actually look for central obesity. Okay, so just showing you that if somebody is obese, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be very sick with metabolic disease. It depends where that fat is stored. And that's kind of the key, which I want to bring home here. So now looking at BMI. So underweight is if your BMI is under 18.5, 18.5 to 25 is normal. And then if your BMI is above 30, you're considered obese. So this is called TOFI, 10 on the outside, fat on the inside. And this was a scan that was done, a DEXA scan, to look at the fat around the organs. And this person, who was age 28, was at a normal BMI of 21. And everywhere there is yellow is where there is fat. So he was fat on the inside. So the key from this is, just because you're thin doesn't mean that you actually are free from metabolic disease. If you're thin, you could have lots of visceral fat. So if you're thin and you're putting in all the junk foods, all the fast foods from McDonald's, and, you know, all the biscuits and cookies and ice cream, and using, you know, deep fried foods and processed seeds oils and soya and all soya oil and all that kind of stuff, and peanut oil to cook your foods in, and rapeseed oil, then you're going to have, even if you're thin, you're going to have a higher risk of developing this fat, which is the visceral fat, fat around the organs, and puts, you know, a lot of pressure on the organs and the function of the organs. Okay, so then obesity prevalence among 10 to 11-year-olds in England's not returned to pre-pandemic levels. So we can see this was 2006, 2007, and up here in 2020 to 21, you can see the big spike. It has dropped a little bit, but not enough, not anywhere near enough. And the lifelong healthcare costs of these 4 to 5 and 10 to 11-year-olds is costing us about 8 million, with a cost to society of 8.7 billion. Now, remember I said 1 in 4 children are obese leaving primary school. So I really do feel as parents, we have responsibility to buy whole foods for our children, spend time educating our children by involving them in cooking, chopping vegetables, preparing the meat, making recipes with them. If they want to eat cake and biscuits, maybe make them. And, it's not going to be something that they're going to eat lots of, but this is something they can have a small amount of. And, really involve your children and educate them on what foods are and, how important it is for their brain and for their health. Obviously, it's very tricky because there's lots of processed foods that have been sent in lunch boxes, and kids get jealous because somebody has a packet of crisps and they have an apple. Hopefully, if you're at a school, then as parents, you can get together and promote whole foods and move away from processed foods. Okay, so how does this impact childhood? And it's impact the same for adults. So obesity can cause type 2 diabetes, cancer, hypertension, polycystic ovarian syndrome, arteriosclerosis, coronary vascular disease, dyslipidemia, sleep apnea, asthma, fatty liver disease, hormone imbalance, GI disorders. So that's the physical. There's probably others, but these are the general ones that research has pointed to. Then psychologically, it can affect, obesity affects, it causes low self-esteem, social discomfort, especially for children in the classroom, feeling like they stand out, they may feel isolated, and this can really pull them down. They feel depressed, start to have negative thoughts about themselves, and then they comfort eat to cope with these stresses, and this leads to the binge eating disorder. It can lead to nighttime eating, which affects the sleep. It can cause anorexia because they want to lose the weight. Then, obviously that's a trigger for anorexia. And really, we need to, be very careful how we speak to our children about food and about their body images, and promote exercise, because when children are exercising, outdoor running, they're not going to be looking on social media and looking at what somebody looks like. They're going to be out running around, enjoying themselves, getting all the adrenaline and all the hormones that feed positivity. And not a cortisol stress kind of response. They're going to feel nice and calm, and they're going to be energized from just exercise alone and interacting with their friends. All of those things are really important to promote a sense of self-worth and a sense of being part of a community. So, doing after-school clubs, all of those things are really important. So obesity not only affects us physically, but it affects us psychologically. Okay, and then these are factors contributing to childhood and adolescent obesity. We have, individual factors. So in the uterus, what's happening, in that environment, did the mom use recreational drugs? She's smoking, alcohol, was she deficient in some nutrients? Then, the parental factors, how we parent as a family together. Is it cohesive? Is it more violent? Is it more aggressive type? Is it more militant? Because all those factors I've said in the past all cause stress to the child. Obviously, there is an element of ethnicity, genetics, physical activities, diet and sleep. And then we have social economic factors. So if the parents are employed or unemployed, will indicate, how much they can afford to spend on food, which is really important for, for the shopping basket, because they may not be able to afford a chicken a whole chicken. So they might opt for, the Kentucky Fried Chicken, because that might look in paper to them might look cheaper. But there are ways around it, and this is where education is really important. So we educate. How can you make a chicken last for 3 days? By making soups out of it, having a roast chicken the first day, then the second day maybe using it with a potato or a sweet potato or rice in a stew, and then the third day making a soup out of it, and then maybe adding in some beans and pulses, and then so again, that's the household income. It has a real influence on what we spend our money on. But there are many people who are very comfortable, middle class, who will have takeouts, several times a week. And that's where their cravings and their sugar addictions are coming from, because now we're not in control of the recipe. So there is going to be cheaper oils, cheaper food products used, so they're not as fresh as what you buy from the store yourself. And then we have communities, so housing, schooling and literacy all play really important factors into this whole obesity issue. But I don't think we can solely blame poor people coming from poor backgrounds, because you see in many countries, third world countries, there isn't any problems with obesity, because they're eating whole foods and they're eating minimal. And growing up as a child, I think most of us will remember, of my age group, that we never had snacks. You ate your 3 meals a day. You never really thought about food. You were out, you were working, whether it was on the farm or doing a paper round. And food wasn't always on your mind, but then food wasn't in your face in every street corner, with stands and coffee shops and on social media with pictures. So that kind of then is, all these social factors are really spurring the idea of needing to eat these type of foods and encouraging us to try different foods to get us addicted. So that's that one. So genetics are, very important. So for example, I had my genetics done with 23andMe, and it showed that I had a propensity to overeat and to be, normal to overweight. Now, I do overeat, but I know I can overeat. I love food, but I never eat the crap ever. I haven't for many years. And I exercise and I move a lot. But I am actually now, conscious that I don't want to overeat in excess of what I need anymore as I've got a bit older, a miser. But I can overeat. So for example, I'm doing carnivore now, and dairy I know is a big trigger for me to overeat. And dairy has that, it can cause, the case of morphine can cause you to become addicted to it. So that happens with ice cream and the sugar and the fat in the ice cream, but it can just happen with yogurt as well. And for me, so in the last 2 days, I've said, no dairy. I want to see how I go without it. And so there isn't, I don't, so I know I don't need to eat the whole 100-gram tub or the liter of ice cream or of yogurt, the Greek yogurt, and it's full fat, because I know I'm full, but I have the cravings. But it doesn't, that eating that is totally different to eating a KFC big bucket of chips and fries and chicken wings, because it's not ultra processed like those. So, I may gain a little bit more, a couple of pounds, but I'm not going to get obese with it. So again, it is, going for whole food sources, even if you have cravings, and maybe having some water or going out for a walk is a good distraction as well to stop that overeating. So that's our genetics. I've talked about that. There's individual variation. So some of us have a higher percentage, I can't say that word, propensity to put on weight. So if those people who have the higher tendency for cravings and tendency to put on weight are in an environment where there is lots of processed seed oils, there is public transport, there's cars, the family drives everywhere. They don't, they don't walk to school, they don't go for a walk in the afternoon, they don't walk to the shops, they're driven everywhere. And that's very common in America. Whereas, they don't even walk to the bus stop because they just walk from the door to the car. Spending lots of time on social media and TV, and then eating the highly processed foods. If that person who has a tendency to put on weight is in that environment, then this is setting them up for obesity. And then obviously the gut microbiome, if it lacks diversity, then there's a higher risk, it's been shown in research, of obesity. Now, if we're eating all of these kind of foods and not exercising and not spending time in nature, then our gut microbiome will have lower diversity with a higher risk of dysbiosis, inflammatory bowel conditions, which all promote obesity. So I think we need to, think about that with our kids, get them out in nature, get their hands dirty, get them planting in the garden with you, the tomatoes and the courgettes and all of that. And then picking them from nature so they see how their food is grown and comes from the garden, and they plant it, they see it grow, they water it, they nurture it, and they see how it grows into this, product at the end. And, basically that's what we're doing to ourselves. We're actually feeding ourselves the seeds to grow our body. But if we feed ourselves with the processed foods, we're going to grow enormous. And then there's other things that we need to think about, because the brain has an area called the hippocampus, which regulates the eating, how we eat, and our appetite control. So before meals, we think about food. So, if you go and somebody says, "You ready for lunch?" Everybody ready for lunch? And then, you start thinking, you probably hadn't thought about food before that, and you start to create the taste for it. Your mouth starts to water, or you walk to the restaurant, you walk into the restaurant, you can smell the food, or you walk in down the bread aisle, the supermarket, and you pass the bread aisle, and there's that smell of freshly baked bread. That triggers a hunger craving. So maybe if you're obese, avoid that bread aisle, because that will trigger those cravings. Then we also, during meals, there's factors like how much we enjoy our food, and the reward we feel decreases as we eat, eventually leading us to stop eating. Additionally, paying attention to eating process itself and our ability to control our impulses also plays a role in meal termination. Okay, so if you're sitting at your meal table, this green one here, if you're sitting at the table and you're eating your meal and you're on your phone or you're watching TV, you're not going to be aware of how much you're eating, not going to be aware of chewing. You're just eating mindlessly, and you haven't paid attention, you haven't been present in that moment, then you're probably not going to feel satisfied. So it's really important that we move away from the phone and we sit down at the table with family members and interact, talk, because you'll eat much more slowly, and enjoy your meal, and pay attention to what you're eating. And then between meals we have memories of our past meal, which affects when we're going to eat again. So memories are really important, because if you've ever got sick on a food, so I've got sick on chicken Kiev when I was in my 20s, I've never ever eaten it since. So that doesn't happen with ice cream. I love gelatos in Italy. So when I think of going to see my daughter in Italy, I always think gelatos, I'm going to have one, I don't care. And it's almost carnivore anyway. But that only happens, when I visit, and it's not that often nowadays. So again, memories are really important for how we associate with food, so they can be positive or negative. So people with eating disorders, there can be many negative connotations around food and around meals. So we really need to be mindful of that with our children. Okay, so next one. So this is the glucose metabolism pathway. So I'm just going to briefly go over this. So when blood sugar levels are high, we have increased blood glucose, and then that's usually after we have consumed a meal, and then that we get the pancreas will release insulin from the beta cells, and then that insulin mobilizes the sugar from the blood into the fat cells, into the liver as glycogen, and into the muscles as glycogen. Now it's stored in the liver and the muscles as glycogen until the blood sugar drops and we need it. That is, will be released again when we need it for energy. And then it's stored as fat in the fat cells. So then glucose is removed from the blood, and it's gone into all these different areas, and then you have a normal range of blood glucose. So then when several hours after we've eaten and we haven't fed again, we will have a hormone released from the pancreas. Is called glucagon, and that stimulates the release of glycogen, which is converted into glucose, and it's released into the blood. So the glucagon is released from the pancreas, stimulated by the breakdown of glycogen into glucose, and then synthesized new glucose. So, but if we, for example, continue eating and we don't have those breaks, so we're never going to use up this, are we? This glycogen here on the muscle glycogen if we're not going to exercise. And then we're going to keep storing fat and making more fat cells. And then this is what happens with insulin resistance and how we develop type 2 diabetes, because we're over consuming calories and the blood glucose is always high because there's plenty glycogen in the liver, there's plenty glycogen in the muscles, and now we have to store excess glucose as fat in the fat cells. And the insulin is constantly being released by the pancreas, but then eventually those insulin receptors in the cell become less sensitive, and when they become less sensitive, it's almost like you've got a bunch of keys and you can't find the one key that'll open that lock, so it doesn't work, basically, and then that blood glucose is circulating high, and that's when we develop type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's important that you have breaks from your meal so you actually can use up these glycogen stores and in the muscles and in the liver, and that you don't develop too many fat cells. Also to do exercise, because that will utilize those glycogen stores as well. Okay. So obesity and insulin resistance. Okay. So excess calories in causes, we talked about this earlier, visceral fat here, subcutaneous fat, and back fat, retroperitoneal fat. Okay, and then that fat, it's called ectopic fat when you have excess fat. So it's overspill of fat, and then the overspill of fat, it spills into the hepatic cells, causing diabetes and non-alcohol fatty liver. Excess fat in the muscle itself, not subcutaneously. Now remember, it's in the muscle. It'll cause dysfunction of the muscle. And in the pancreas, it'll cause beta cell dysfunction. So you'll be producing less insulin. So then that causes, high amounts of glucose in the blood. And also because this is causing dysfunction here in the muscle, the muscle becomes less sensitive to insulin, and high amounts of glucose will remain in the blood as well. And then it can cause endothelial dysfunction because you get this perivascular fat in the vessels, and that causes inflammation in the vessels, leading to arteriosclerosis and all of those conditions we talked about before. So obesity and type 2 diabetes coexist together. Okay, so they coexist. Not always, but they coexist when there's excess visceral fat. not particularly with the subcutaneous fat as we talked earlier, but most often it's with the visceral fat. So they coexist together. Okay, so now there's two hormones we need to look at, leptin and ghrelin, and their influence on appetite. So leptin is a hormone that's released by the fat cells here. So more fat cells, the more leptin you have. And you think that might be a good thing. Well, leptin is important for satiety. So it's our satiety hormone, but too much of it is a bad thing. And then we have another hormone over here, which is released from the stomach. It's called ghrelin. I always think that's how I used to always remember ghrelin. Ghrelin is the growl. So when you're hungry, your stomach growls. That's the one that is known as the hunger hormone. And that will signal the brain that you need to eat food. You eat food because the ghrelin becomes high and you eat food. And then leptin is low when you eat food because it knows that you're full. It's the satiety hormone. So leptin is released by the fat cells. It regulates how much energy your body uses based on how much fat you have. Signals fat stores to the brain's hypothalamus, regulates appetite and energy expenditure over long term. Low levels may increase appetite, leading to overeating. Okay, so low levels may lead to, so if there was a genetic problem that levels were low, it could lead to overeating. Obesity can lead to leptin resistance, where high levels are present but less effective. So you have low levels, which can cause a person to overeat, but what we see in leptin resistance is high levels. And then we have other hormones which are involved. Peptide tyrosine and gut peptides also play a role in the regulation of appetite. And adipocytokines are substances involved in the regulation of appetite, and they're released from the adipocytes. So we're not going to talk too much more about ghrelin, but we will be talking more about leptin, because leptin is key and is something that's not often discussed when we're looking at obesity in general. So this is the balancing scale. So if you're hungry, an easy way to see it, you have lots of ghrelin growling in the stomach and less leptin, so leptin is low. When you're full, you have lots of leptin and less ghrelin. Okay, so you're reached satiety. So that's basically just that slide. So leptin and ghrelin, they both have physiological functions in the body. So leptin regulates appetite, signals for fullness to reduce hunger and food intake. So it helps in the metabolic balance of energy so that you don't overeat. So that's, I've said about the energy balance. It regulates glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity. It's involved in reproduction function, plays a role in menstrual cycle regulation and fertility, and immune function, modulates immune cell function and inflammation. It's also involved in bone formation. Interesting thing in leptin is that where it can affect osteoblasts and the lay down, how bones are laid down. It can actually cause the bones to break down instead of making new bone. It can cause them to break down. So this is often seen in conditions like arthritis, where there's high levels of leptin, and it promotes destruction of the joint. So leptin promotes the production of factors that stimulate bone reabsorption and break down inactivity of the osteoblasts. So, you know, it's important when we look at conditions like autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or joint pain in general, which is often seen in autoimmune conditions, that we think, okay, is this due to inflammation? Is this due to high levels of leptin? And, you know, how do we lower those levels? Then ghrelin suppresses appetite, promotes hunger, and increases food intake. Growth hormone and secretion stimulates the release of growth hormone. Energy balance by promoting energy intake. Gastric motility, it influences the stomach movement of food in digestion. and then is implicated in the body's response to stress with increased levels during stressful situations. So that's leptin and ghrelin. So they have other functions outside of appetite control, which I wanted to highlight. But for the sake of this, we're looking at leptin as the satiety hormone and ghrelin as the hunger hormone. Next. Okay, so what happens in leptin resistance? So leptin resistance is, there can be a few causes. So there's some genetic causes. So there may be failure for leptin to cross the blood-brain barrier. So for whatever reason, it can't cross the blood-brain barrier. There may be impaired expression of leptin receptors. So there are fewer leptin receptors. And then the gene doesn't function well. So it lacks, there's loss of function. And then there may be impaired signaling of leptin on these different pathways of the genes. So there may be a mutation in any of these genes affecting the signaling of leptin. So causes of leptin resistance are inflammation in the hypothalamus. And again, things that cause inflammation in the hypothalamus would be stress, because cortisol can do that. Also processed foods, high sugar diets, high diets in seed oils, gut infections, dysbiosis affecting the gut-brain axis, insulin resistance, chronic stress, I've said that, environmental toxins, eating behaviors, and poor sleep. So all of those will contribute to leptin resistance. Now remember, high level of leptin, when there's too much of it, it creates something called leptin resistance, which is very similar to insulin resistance. And the person cannot, so that message isn't getting to the brain that the person had enough to eat. So it's just like the insulin lacking of sensitivity. It's the same with the leptins. And there's receptors in the liver, in the muscles, and in the fat cells. And then you produce more fat cells when you are overweight and obese. So you have naturally higher levels of leptin. And they've seen that in obese people, they have higher levels of leptin. So leptin resistance occurs when the body becomes less responsive to the hormone leptin. So when it's less responsive, then it's not getting that satiety signal, and then we're always feeling hungry. We've always got those cravings, even though we know we have to be full. And so when people lose weight, body weight, and then they can't keep it off, often it is because of this leptin resistance. So higher body fat percentage equals higher levels of leptin. And then the leptin resistance in diet induced obesity. So more than 1 billion people in the world are now living with obesity, according to the World Health Organization, just come out. Obesity amongst adults has more than doubled since 1990. It has quadrupled among children and adolescents, 5 to 19 years of age. And again, remember, we're looking at this central obesity as being the real issue for heart disease, strokes, diabetes, insulin resistance. So it's caused by overnutrition. Fat stores are increased, as you can see, so accumulation of fat cells. There is a higher amounts of leptin, and then there's higher amounts of inflammation with all these inflammatory cytokines. Then this inflammation, leptolemia, anemia, I can't say it, leads to central and peripheral leptin resistance coming from the foods we eat. So the central is in the central nervous system, affecting the brain. So there is not that switch off signal, so we overeat, causing obesity and type 2 insulin resistance and high blood sugars and cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease. And then the peripheral, it affects the organs, the muscles, and the fat cells. So more fat cells producing more leptin, higher amounts of fat in the liver, making us more higher risk of getting type 2 diabetes. And then in the muscles, we talked about all that earlier, the fat in the muscles, again, affecting the function of the muscle and less sensitivity to insulin. So everything becomes here less sensitive to insulin, promoting higher blood sugars, increasing the risk of type 2 diabetes. And then in the gut, leptin can cause dysbiosis, high levels, because we're eating those processed foods. We've already talked about that, which promotes an imbalance in the gut microbiome and a dysbiotic gut, favoring a lower portion of positive gut flora to more of the gram-negative ones, which are the more pro-inflammatory. And there can be cases of inflammatory bowel disease as well, seen with leptin resistance. So it's really important that we address this so that we can reverse all of these other symptoms. So one thing I'll just have here, this ladder here, which is obesity leads to low-grade inflammation. So low-grade inflammation leads to low-grade inflammation causes leptin resistance. And leptin resistance causes neurodegenerative degeneration leading to cognitive decline. So, you see that with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and MS. Often these conditions can be triggered from eating junk and high processed foods. And if you ever worked in a nursing home with the elderly, they love sugar. They absolutely love it. The smile comes to their face. And it's really, actually promoting more confusion, more of that neurological inflammation that we talked about earlier. And Alzheimer's is the end result. So really, if we love people, we will take them away from the sugar bowl. And in fact, nobody would eat sugar out of a sugar bowl, I'm sure of it, because it's just pure sugar. I did know somebody who actually liked to spoon it into their mouth. But in general, the vast majority of us will not go to the sugar bowl and eat lots of sugar. We will eat it in the form of biscuits with fat and oil and sugar combined, or in ice creams or in chips. It's that combination that's triggering us to overeat. It's not the sugar bowl or the honey that is doing that. And babies born to mothers with B12 deficiency have a higher than normal leptin level. So B12 deficiency is important. So if the mother has B12 deficiency, then the baby is going to probably have higher levels of leptin. So they're at a disadvantage. So that's really key. So it's key, our micronutrients, that we always address the missing micronutrients to bring balance back to the body. Symptoms of leptin resistance they're very similar to blood sugar: feeling stressed, crave carbohydrates, sugar, hungry even after eating, belly fat, difficulty losing weight and maintaining weight loss. Elevated levels of triglycerides, elevated triglycerides usually indicates inflammation. Now, saturated fat doesn't always put triglycerides up unless it's, really processed saturated fat. But if it's seed oils, that will put triglycerides up and cause inflammation, elevated serum reactive protein, and high blood pressure. So it's this kid here who can't decide between, that or that. And you know what he's going to choose? He's going to choose the salt, the fat, and the carbs, because that combination of fat, sugar, and salty is just the perfect mouth taste to get a kid to eat more. And then, really what we can do to combat leptin resistance, to combat insulin resistance, and I kind of kept talking about leptin resistance because I think it's something that's not discussed. We need to think, we start with the food, okay? High quality protein. So not KFC, McDonald's, not pizza, that's not protein. High quality protein, a piece of chicken, whole chicken breast, chicken thigh, a steak, mincemeat. It's fresh, it's high quality, and you need 30 to 40 grams of protein on your plate for satiety and for function of all the amino acids. Amino acids play a really important role in bodily functions, and so you know to reach the amount of protein you need in a day, so you'd need 30 to 40 grams per meal if you're eating 3 meals to get your adequate levels of protein for building muscle. Slow, low carbs. So I'm saying if you're trying to lose weight, go for the slow, low carbs. Things like you could have sweet potato over white potato. You could have wild rice over white rice, or you could have brown rice. Other things you could have would be, go for the whole, like lentils, as opposed to eating pasta. So those kind of things, they're higher in fiber and they're a slower release of insulin, a slower release of carbs, of sugar into the blood. So because they're combined with fiber, and then you add the protein in, and then you have, some healthy fats in there, which I don't think healthy fats further down, all that slows the release of sugar down slows the release of sugar. Then fiber-rich foods are important. Gluten-free diet if you're gluten intolerant, intermittent fasting. So I put in gluten-free diet and also maybe lactose-free diets or dairy-free diets, because gluten can be very inflammatory and so can dairy. Now, if somebody's trying to lose weight, a really easy way to lose it is if you cut out all gluten, all dairy, but don't go buying all that processed gluten-free stuff, because that's crap. But it will drop your weight really quickly because it'll drop inflammation. Or, you could swap out gluten, the cheaper bread for a sourdough bread. So that's lower in gluten, and it will definitely be lower in how your body reacts to it for inflammation. Intermittent fasting is something that's actually, really helpful for inflammation, lowering it, also for lowering leptin resistance, and I've lost my slides now, sorry. It's also good to have lower blood sugars, and it'll help you use up the fat stores, your own fat stores. So, starting with making sure you start with 12 hours, and then you could, gradually build up to 14 hours of fasting, build up to 16 hours. You could do that, say, have lunch around 3 and then fast until the next day. Or you could do what I do, which is usually fast until 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But it's better to do the other way around if you can. I prefer doing it the morning because I find it easier. But you don't necessarily need to do that to lose weight. If you just eat whole foods and swap out all the garbage for good quality whole foods, then you will drop weight and water weight and body fat. Other things that are important: drinking water and apple cider vinegar can actually help with digestion. It can also help with losing weight and lowering your blood sugar. That's been shown in research. Other things are cinnamon, which I haven't listed in there, fenugreek. Those are all helpful for balancing blood sugars. However, if you're going to be eating ice cream and putting cinnamon on it, and if you're going to be eating KFCs and putting cinnamon on it, forget it. Cinnamon is not going to do anything. Then, there is this whole thing. If you eat a high fiber food before you eat your, so if you ate a high fiber food like, say, broccoli, lentils, with some fat, before you have something sweet, then that should help lower the blood sugar. Then exercise is key. Building muscle is key to so many things, but it's key to it's key to boosting our metabolism. So the more muscle mass you have, the more calories you're going to burn. So, and then you can afford to eat a little bit more. Cardio training you can do, but I would promote resistance training if you were to choose and make time. I would make time for resistance training more than cardio training because, as I say, many people spend lots of hours on cardio, but then as soon as they're finished, you stop burning those calories. Whereas you build the muscle, it stays there. It's being metabolically active, so it's going to constantly burn calories. Whereas a cardio, as soon as you've done it, it's done. That's it. That's the amount of calories you're going to burn. So I want a more long-term approach by promoting resistance training, and it'll affect your posture, how you carry yourself, how you look. You'll feel more confident. It'll encourage you, I think, to be once you start seeing the results from doing resistance training and seeing your muscles pop, it'll encourage you to want to do more, and it'll encourage you to eat healthier because now you can see physical changes. HIIT training is another one, you know, like for 30 minutes, you do some cardio and weight training together in a class. That's a great way of doing it. It's fast and sharp, but not everybody can manage HIIT training. And it's, you know, quite demanding, and it could actually generate stress in the body, producing a lot more cortisol. So don't feel like you have to do HIIT training. And if your trainer is doing HIIT training with you and you hate it, I mean, I was a terrible person when I was training my group for doing burpees and all sorts. And burpees, push-ups, and all sorts. And I'm sure people didn't like it, but I loved doing it with everybody. But there are some people who, if they're obese, will not be able to do those types of training. So as a trainer, you need to remember that. Dancing, yoga, Pilates, swimming, rebounder, walking in nature, those are all really good for the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. So to calm everything down, calm down that cortisol response and promote relaxation. So you don't have to go to the gym. You can dance, you can do yoga, you can do belly dancing, you can do a swimmer, you can do the rebounder. Anything that gets you moving, do it. Start somewhere. It might be the rebounder. That's a nice, gentle way to get your body moving, let the lymph system flowing, and promote movement without impact. And eventually, you may feel confident enough to go to the gym, go out for walks, spend time in nature, do some yoga. And, you know, gradually you have a periodized program where you actually, you know, building up to, you know, a level where you can actually feel more confident and do something you enjoy. That's really important. Then there are the microbiome. We can feed it with prebiotic foods from fermented foods, probiotics, bone broth, herbs like cinnamon. I said fenugreek, ginseng, all good for the microbiome. Sleep, spending time outdoors in the sunlight, dark bedrooms, avoid caffeine, alcohol, smoking. Do not eat 3 hours before bed, avoid electronics, remove environmental toxins, open windows, take saunas. So our environment can affect how our hormones signal, it can affect our gut microbiome, it can affect inflammation in the brain, so neuroinflammation. So that affects the crosstalk between the brain and the gut. The hormones affect, you know, gut and brain and organs. So it's important we remove toxins and we spend time outdoors and we sleep so we can actually detox the lymphatic system in the brain and that we have energy in the day to exercise and be more positive mindset. So when you're tired, you tend to crave more, you want to eat more, you go for the sugary, you go for the fast foods, you don't want to spend time preparing food. So sleep is key. So I'm going to wrap it up there. So the takeaway from this is central obesity is key. So the visceral fat, which promotes metabolic disease like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, strokes, inflammation, and leptin resistance, which promotes overeating. So that's something we need to consider. And we actually need to, as trainers, nutritionists, and as doctors, we need to consider, as well as insulin resistance and high levels of blood sugar in the body, that actually there is a level of leptin resistance, and how we reverse that, it can take time, and it's maybe something we should measure. It's not something that is measured routinely. I've actually never seen it being measured, but it's something as a nutritionist we can do functionally. We can see what a fasting leptin level is in the blood. So I think that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed that. I might come back and do one on exercise and more on the diet at a later date. But I think what I really wanted to drill home here today is that highly processed foods lead to addictive behaviors, leads to overeating, leads to obesity, leads to inflammation in the body, which cascades on to cause all the metabolic diseases that we've already discussed. And remember, leptin resistance causes breakdown of bone and can cause joint pain and destruction. So, key to address it, because, people coming in for knees, hips, shoulder replacements, or with arthritic conditions, could be resolved if we lower leptin and we reduce inflammation. I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope it inspires you as mums to really look at what's on how you're preparing your food for your kids. And, a treat is not necessarily getting your child a Kentucky Fried Chicken or McDonald's. A treat would be, making something with your child that they really like, whether it's lasagna or spaghetti bolognese or, banana bread. There's lots of healthy recipes that you can find, and get them involved in the cooking, talk about food, show them ingredients, get them growing vegetables in the garden, get them out exercising with you, because we're the role models for our kids. And if you're not exercising, you're sitting at home eating takeaway and drinking a beer and having a fag, well, why that's not going to inspire your kid to, in a positive way. So we really need to inspire our kids by being positive role models and, showing them at our age, 50, 60, 70, that we can be strong adults and live very active, happy lives. And that's what you want. The stronger you are by lifting heavy things, doesn't have to be the gym, I said, but lifting heavy things, walking, spending time outdoors in nature, eating whole foods will lead to a happier retirement and a more mobile retirement and independence and not dependence. And it will also help combat neurological conditions such as Alzheimer's, migraines, anything that causes anything, around neuroinflammation. So I hope this has inspired you to think about, how you can change your patterns by swapping out those fast foods for whole foods, and involving your family and your kids in a healthy eating program. Okay, so bye for now. I hope you enjoyed this slideshow. And if you could like and subscribe and share, please, I would really appreciate it. Put some comments in the bottom, and just let me know what other subjects you'd like me to talk about. Okay, hope you all have a great week, and thanks for watching. Bye.